Good evening. It is now 7 o'clock p.m. This is the June 8th, 2022 meeting of the Trail, Sidewalks, and Bikeways Committee. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, the committee needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It is a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of the committee is participating in this meeting from separate locations, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each committee member participating in the meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. I am the representative at large and chair, Ken Comer, calling from my home in Springfield. Braddock District, Mr. Cosgrave.
Yes, this is Bob Cosgrave, the Braddock District rep. I'm calling from my home in Hickory Farms in Braddock District.
Thank you. Heard you. Hunter Mill District, Mr. Rowe.
This is Alex Rowe calling from my home in Reston.
Thank you, Alex. Heard you. Mount Vernon District, Mr. Klein.
This is Jim Klein calling from my home under the DC Reagan airspace and in the Mount Vernon District. If you hear a large aurora when I'm talking, that's what it is.
Well, for what it's worth, there's about to be a rather sizable thunderstorm hit here. So if I disappear, it's because I've lost power. Anyway, yes, it's summertime. Dranesville District, Ms. Lawrence.
Lydia Lawrence calling from a sidewalk near my home in the Dranesville District.
Thank you, Lydia. I hear you fine. We do not have a Providence District representative. Is that correct? Nothing heard. Okay, Mason District, Mr. Albright.
James Albright, calling in from Bluefield, West Virginia, but still representing the Mason District.
Understand, and we hear you. Springfield District, Mr. Liebert. Nothing heard. Lee District, Ms. Partland. Nothing heard. Sully District, Ms. Ampa.
Yes, I'm calling in from Fairfax City representing Sully District.
Thanks, Karen. I heard you. Clifton Horse Society, Ms. McDaniel.
This is Katie McDaniel calling in from my home in Oak Hill.
Thank you, Katie. We heard you. Fab, Mr. Newman. No response. Fairfax Area Disability Services Board is vacant, correct? Fairfax County Federation of Citizens Associations, Mr. Tipton. No response. Fairfax County Park Authority, Ms. Iannetta.
This is Beth calling in from the city of Fairfax.
Thanks, Beth. We heard you. Northern Virginia Builders Industry Association, Ms. Bortilla. No response. Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority. Is there anybody from the Regional Park Authority here? No response. And WABA, Mr. Albers.
Howard Albers calling in from my home in Fairfax, Virginia.
Thank you, Howard. Can hear you. Now let's find out who is here from staff.
Yeah, this is David Loss.
Thanks, David. We hear you.
And Nicole Winans of City UT.
Thank you, Nicole. Is it just you two tonight?
Yep.
Okay, good. Are there any members of the public present? Or is there anybody whose name I did not call?
This is Brian Richard. I'm just a member of the public list, interested in what the committee is talking about.
Thank you, Brian. You are welcome. By our rules, at 8:30, we open the floor to you. You can say anything or nothing, but the rules require that we give you the floor at a particular time. We've chosen 8:30 to do that. We may be done with our business early, so we may pop you in early, but at any rate, that's we will interrupt the flow of stuff to just give you the floor, just so you're not surprised by that.
I don't think I'll have anything to say, but thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures. The fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this committee to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting. And that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this committee and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this committee may conduct this meeting electronically through the Microsoft Teams platform. This format will also provide a dedicated phone line. The public may access this meeting by going to www.fairfaxcounty.gov/transportation/trails and using the Microsoft Teams link there, or by calling 571-429-5982 and using the access code 389-589-440#. It is so moved. Hearing no objections, this voice carries with no nay votes. Finally, it is next required to establish that all of the matters addressed in today's agenda address the emergency itself, are necessary for the continuity in Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of this committee's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. I will again ask if there are any objections or nay votes. Hearing none, the motion carries. So just a short point of order with staff. I guess neither one, maybe David can answer the question. Are we actually calling the Northern Virginia Regional Trails, no, I'm sorry, the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority position vacant? I have a name of Mike Depew. Is that no longer operative?
Sorry, my understanding is that he's the person they nominated to take over when Andrea left. He's on my communication list, so I guess I've never heard back from him.
Yeah, but these names have to be, don't these names have to be approved by the board?
I'm not entirely sure of how the rules work necessarily for like the non like provincial seats. So I'm not.
All of us have a letter, but I don't know if Sean, do you have a letter? No, Sean Newman isn't here. Let's see.
I have a letter.
Katie?
This is Beth. I had to get a letter for Park Authority.
So you were approved by the Board of Supervisors. So I think whatever name has to be in there. I'm only asking because we do a formal letter to the Board of Supervisors and it lists all of our members, and I don't want to put a name on there that they haven't approved. Anyway, okay. Thanks for resolving that.
Okay, yeah, I can look into see if I can find out anything about whether or not he's gotten such a formal recognition.
Voted before the board and sort of appointed to a 2-year term like everybody else. So
yeah. This is Jim.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I know Mike, I can maybe talk to him in a week or two. I'll have a appointment with him. So I'll ask him
Really?
if he's where he's at.
Okay.
He's a busy guy.
Yeah, I understand that. And
Hopefully not too busy for us. I'll just give him a lot of grief.
yeah, please do. We'd love to have him with us. They rarely join us, and their very important park is a critical trail running right through our county. So we need him probably more than he needs us, but it's kind of useful to have him join us. Okay, moving on to our agenda here. Let's see. We have minutes from April and May. Is that correct, Beth?
No, I'm hoping we can defer them for this month. They're going to be out on Friday with June. So that's the game plan. So I'd like to defer minutes for this month.
Roger that. That makes it easy. Next, we have a presentation by Nicole on draft bicycle parking guidelines. So the floor is yours, Nicole.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. Or actually, before I do that, let me say a few words because I don't have a formal presentation. I brought the actual document that we can kind of walk through together. And the background story is that, as you may know, we have countywide bicycle parking guidelines already. They were adopted in 2014. Charlie Strong took the lead on that, if you remember Charlie. And they were very comprehensive and great to have. And they have been serving the county really well. We use them very frequently on, when we work with developers on establishing, what is we would consider appropriate bicycle parking through the profit process. We have also used it for our county parking facilities as well as, any other parking facilities that are needed. And it has been a couple of years, so we are getting at like 8 years of bicycle parking guidelines. So they aged well so far. Like they're not completely outdated yet, but it was definitely time for an update. Active Fairfax was a good vehicle to do so as part of this entire, look at all of our active transportation guidance. And then there's also the a new guide coming out on the federal level. There is a chapter on bicycle parking included in the upcoming update of the AASHTO bicycle facility design guide. So that's a federal standard and federal guidance that we previously didn't have. So there was a basically a group, APBP, Association of Active Transportation Professionals. Not quite sure what exactly they stand for, but they gave, they provided a document about 10 years ago, 12 years ago with the bicycle parking standards, and that was mostly it. So we have been using their standards in the United States, and they were good standards, but they were not something official from the federal government. So the upcoming AASHTO guide is a first take on a more serious, official stamped document. And one of the goals of this update is to make sure that we are in line with those future updates because they're probably not coming out until next year. So we're slightly ahead of the curve. Originally, we wanted to wait to make sure we, have the final version approved. But the county is also working on a general update of the parking requirements in the zoning code, the Parking Reimagined. You've heard the presentation, you're familiar with the process. And since they're looking at parking guidance in the zoning code anyways, we have been wanting to integrate our bicycle parking guidelines into the zoning code for years now, but we have always been told, when we are looking at the parking guidelines, that's the best time to update the zoning code. So that's happening now. So we had to expedite the update of these bicycle parking guidelines in order to not hold up the update of the zoning code. So that's why this was one of the first things we tackled as part of phase 2. And what I'm going to present today is the first draft that we received from the consultant. So, and after this meeting, we can share this draft with you for your review, and you're welcome to take it back to your organizations and review and provide comments. It's a very technical document, so if your bike parking is not quite of interest, so you don't feel like you have to, but I'm sure FAB and WABA and whatnot that represent the cyclists on this committee will be very interested in making sure that our bicycle parking guidelines meet current best practices and then the specific needs of cyclists in Fairfax County. So let me share the document. Second, there you go. And it's not edited like in a it's not in a published format yet. This is really a Word document, which is easier to edit and track edits. And once we have a more final version, we will put it into a nice looking document that we can publish. I should also say that the goal is to have this linked in the public facilities manual. So currently it's already linked to the current guidelines. So we would need to update that reference to this new guide when it's adopted. Okay, so this is a table of contents. So it's similar to the previous guidance in that it addresses short and long-term bicycle parking needs, facility types, design details, and spacing, and also the amount of parking that is required or encouraged depending on the use and the function. But then we added a new chapter on special considerations with the focus on micromobility. So scooter parking, for example, but also non-conventional bicycles, and as well as, parking at transit facilities and also bicycle-friendly businesses, which provide the parking at the commuter destination. Let me just scroll through here so you get an idea of what it's like. And you can, review it in more detail at your own time. It's a little bit shorter than the previous guide. The previous guide was very text heavy. There were a lot of pictures, but bike parking was still new at the time, like a new thing that people weren't familiar with. But we've now implemented bike parking for 8 years, so we can streamline a little bit, make it a little bit more user friendly, and focus on the most important aspects of the design guidance. So first it explains, what is a long-term versus short-term bicycle parking spot. The long-term bicycle parking is really meant for, employees in buildings that have to park their bikes for a long time, or someone that would like to, have a multimodal commute and park the bike at a metro station, then take the metro in and leave the bike out for a long time. So having a sheltered location that's access controlled to protect the bicycle from the weather, but also from theft is the goal. And then short-term bicycle parking is still needed for, in front of a store for, a quick, shopping trip, or a visitor parking spot in front of a residential building or an office building, or, a theater. So when it's like about 2 hours or less, that's when it's considered a short-term bike parking need. So then it goes a little bit more in detail on the location and design. For example, how close is it supposed to be to the primary entrance, visibility, lighting, some protection if it's there, like an awning or some other type of shelter would be ideal if it's available. And a good example, for example, is the some of the county rec centers have an awning in the entrance. It's covered, so we were able to install some visitor bike parking there. And then, of course, if it's installed via right away, it will require a VDOT permit. And then there's a discussion of some of the negative impacts of, what could happen, if the racks are not installed correctly, for example, blocking ADA access or fire hydrants and handicapped parking spaces. So to avoid all of that, there's some guidance on that. The images that will be used in this guide are from the current guidance from APBP, mostly because we don't have the images from the Astro Guide yet. So even though we have seen the Astro Guide, we don't have permission to use those images yet because they're not approved and final. So at some point, maybe if there's a difference, we may need to make it a small update, but from my understanding is that the Astro Guide mostly is based on the APBP recommendations and actually uses very similar images. So hopefully this will age well and we don't need to update. Then there's a section on the type of racks, the style, what is encouraged, what are good bike racks that support the bikes in a way that they don't get damaged and that they can be locked correctly to mitigate any theft. So it's all about the mounting points and also some issues about how the rack is locked to the ground and what surface it should sit on, how it's spaced, and other things. So if we see, for example, racks that are too close to walls, so they can only be used on one side, or they're too close to each other, or it's just the wrong type of rack. It's a rack that looks like it can fit a lot of bikes, like a wave rack, for example, but it's really not designed in a way to support more than 2 bikes based on this recommendation, because you can only lean against the rack in 1 point instead of 2, which makes the bike more susceptible to tipping over and damage. And it's harder to lock correctly. And there's a note on areas and districts with urban design guidelines. So often they have a specific rack that they recommend that is branded or a certain color or a certain style that they would like to see all over, McLean and Annandale and Mayerfield. So there often is a color scheme that they have among the public amenities like street lights and benches. So the specific rack style is mentioned in those special area design guidelines and the streetscaping standards. Then we have a whole section on long-term bicycle parking, which is can be really tricky and takes a lot of coordination between the county and the developers to get it right. So we're trying to use our experience of years of negotiating with developers on getting this parking correct and trying to explain how best to fulfill this requirement. So it has some discussion about what type of facility can be used. And I'm sorry for the background noise. My kids just came home, so I hear them from the kitchen. Then here you have some images of these, for example, like bike lockers or freestanding bike rooms. But there's also the opportunity to, of course, put them in a parking garage as long as there's some sort of fenced off area that is access controlled within parking garages. Then there are also bike rooms, which are actual complete rooms with doors and walls that are very common among developments to go down that route. So it has some explanations of how to design those correctly and some of the things to watch out for, as well as how to place bike lockers within a bike room. There's also a section on required amenities. For example, the access control, lighting are things that are really important to the theft control and safety, also personal safety, because some of these rooms are a little bit more secluded. So having good visibility and some control of who can access that room will prevent theft and also improve personal safety, but then also what type of racks should be provided. So if you're familiar with our previous bicycle parking guidelines, they ask for about 30%. Oh, and that's actually a target that should also be 30%. 30% of long-term parking spaces should be inverted U racks. And that's one comment we have to pretty much make to every single development application, because there's so much parking required that they often tend to just propose the high capacity racks. And those racks really are not that user friendly, particularly if a bike is heavier and needs to be lifted, or it's a non-standard rack, non-standard bike that doesn't fit on the rack. So we always want to see about a 30% inverted U racks in those bike rooms and bike cages in the long-term parking in order to accommodate those a variety of users with different abilities and preferences. And what is new is that we're requiring a minimum of 20% of high capacity racks that are wall mounted and allow bikes to be vertically stored. And that's really important for particularly owners of sport bikes that have thinner tires. They're ideally not stored, sitting on the tires, but hanging on the walls. And often those are popular racks already, so a lot of developers propose those anyway. This is what we also provide in many of our bike rooms at metro stations. But we would like to see at least 20%, and then the remaining 50% could be, for example, these double-decker racks where you can either lift up the bike and double park them on top of each other, or sometimes you can pull them down so you don't have to lift. So there's a variety of other options that are available to developers to meet these criteria. And then wayfinding is also really important, because sometimes these rooms are located in not as obvious spaces, in parking garages, for example. So it's helpful to have some wayfinding signage to allow people to find their parking location more easily. Then there's some discussion on some other amenities, such as it actually goes a little bit more detail here. So those are the optional amenities down here. For example, bicycle repair stations, benches to sit on, when somebody wants to change their shoes. Lock holders are pretty popular, so people don't have to take their lock with them. They can just hang it in the designated place. Lockers for accessories. Public art is something we often recommend to make these rooms a little bit more human friendly, especially in parking garages. So some colorful floor paint or a colorful wall can go a long way to make the space a bit more attractive and comfortable. Security cameras, of course, is a really good feature. It doesn't necessarily prevent theft, as we know from our free wheelie bike room. There's a lot of theft there, even though there is a security camera, but it's nice to have, as well as showers. We have seen a few developers that offer that. That's a tricky one, but it's always appreciated when it's offered, particularly by in office buildings by commuters. All right, let's see. So there's like a table that kind of summarizes what the difference is between short-term and long-term parking, location-wise, security-wise. So it's just like a general overview. And then it goes into the actual requirements when it comes to how many spaces do I need to provide, depending on my location. So this is a little bit different and more complex than the previous bicycle parking guide. The previous one had just a few different land uses, and then it had a kind of like a separate matrix for bicycle parking in TSA areas, transit station areas, where we would expect a lot of people to want to have bikes to commute to the metro. And then a separate table for all other areas. And it was mostly based on square footage, but the new Astro guide goes into great detail, really depending on what the type of land use is, where, so that's where all these acronyms coming from. So we're looking at bedrooms and sleeping rooms, and yes, there's still the floor area, square footage, but also maximum expected attendance. For example, a house of worship or a college, a dorm room, space per employees, then space per students of planned capacity for schools, for example, and also space per student. And then there are two notes here that a minimum of 2 bike parking spaces should always be provided, no matter what the square footage is or how many bedrooms there are. And then it has that note about the 20%, which should be 30% of the parkings that should be inverted U racks, and 20% that should be floor-mounted vertical racks. So this is what the table looks like, and it's longer, so you can see how long this is. Yeah, it goes over a couple of pages, but it's just one table this time. Actually, it's kind of broken up, but it looks like it's more tables, but it's just one. So we have now 3 tiers, and this is based on the same categories that Parking Reimagine is using for their car parking. So there's a tier 1, which is low density, a tier 2 that's medium density, and tier 3 that's high density. How exactly that will be defined is still work in progress, but in general, this is kind of the strategy we're going to pursue. And then we have short-term and long-term parking under those tiers. And we have a lot more detailed land uses you can see here. So we have, for example, religious institutions and colleges and in libraries, all kind of listed separately. There's some offices, industrial, institutional, hospitality is not something we had before, and residential buildings with garages, without garages. We didn't have previous guidance on those. So we're trying to be as detailed as possible, so there's not so much guessing, both on the developer side, but also the staff side. So we don't have to do research for every more unusual application. Like, you're not just a commercial building that's pretty straightforward, but that we can just look at this guide and be pretty confident of what the recommendation should be. And I'm not going through all of these, but I want to mention that the AASHTO guide provides these numbers. So we didn't come up with those ourselves. These are all based on AASHTO, or the upcoming AASHTO for tier 1 and tier 3. So AASHTO did not have a tier 2, but we just took the middle. So if it's 5 and 10, we took 7, or 8. So we tried to kind of fit right in the middle to make sense based on the land use, and to have that third, in between category, which is more of the suburban land use. And then below that are special consideration. So there's a little bit on micromobility. And one interesting thing here to note is the need for electric outlets. So that's something we would like to see more of a requirement, that 2 outlets should be provided per inverted U racks in the long-term parking, in order to allow any sort of e-vehicles, electric vehicles, to be charged while being parked. And then there's a short segment on transit and bicycle facilities, including bus racks, but also bike parking at bus stops and transit stations, and a note on the bicycle-friendly business, which is really important because we don't necessarily have a lot of the abilities to encourage private property owners to provide bike parking, and particularly businesses that are well established and won't be redeveloping anytime soon, can use this program to encourage their employees, but also customers, to bike to their location and meet some of their TM goals. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview. So I pause here and see if you have any questions. And you have to speak up because I can't see any raised hands, or maybe David can take a look at the questions.
So Howard's got his hand up first, if you want to go ahead.
Could you just go back to your table, and I'm looking for where would farmers markets fall into your table? Farmers markets. How many bicycle parking spaces
That's a good question. So there, I mean, obviously you can't cover every single land use, so then we have to kind of see what would make sense. I would probably think there would be maybe grocery or general retail, but that's with the square footage. So depending on the size of the farmer's market, maybe. That's my guess, like looking at the different options that there are. It's probably the closest. Yeah, so I would go with that.
So you would take the square footage of the farmer's market and then try and squeeze it, see if it fits into this table?
Yeah, and farmers markets is interesting because they're usually located on existing properties that serve a different purpose. So for example, they are in a park or in a is on a private property that has some sort of building or use already on it. So often bike parking should be provided through that use. But if there's an interest to have a land use that's only dedicated to farmers markets, then we would look at this table. I don't think there is such a thing in Fairfax County, but
there's not.
Yeah, but then it would probably be called a grocery, land use, grocery store, even though it's outdoors. So it's a little bit tricky with some of these special like event uses. So we would look at the underlying land use, or just make a case-by-case recommendation. If the question comes up, like how much bike parking do I need for my farmers market, we can look at some of this guidance, but make an educated recommendation on how much may be needed. And square footage is probably a good way to go, or number of customers, and then cover some. I don't know if there's vehicular parking requirements for farmers markets, so that may be another way to address that specific need.
The other thing is, in no case there would be less than 2, though. Is that kind of the case?
Correct. If it's dedicated land use, yes. So the minimum would be 2 for all land uses.
Thank you.
Jim Klein, you're next.
Okay. I just had 2 related questions. One is, what triggers this ordinance? Is it new development or some form of redevelopment? And then if someone asks for a waiver, who reviews and approves the waiver?
So this is usually done through zoning, rezoning cases. So new development, also larger renovations trigger that. If somebody just replaces the sign, that's like sometimes people come in with like a rezoning application for a sign, that would probably not trigger a bike parking recommendation, but we can always ask, and it's then up to our site planning staff to negotiate through the prefer process. And Beth probably knows more about it because she used to do that, how exactly that works in that case. But yeah, it's usually new developments, redevelopments. By right development doesn't have as much teeth, so we don't have as much leverage to get bike parking there. Now that we have at least a reference to bike parking recommendations in the public facilities manual, hopefully that at least provides the guidelines to the developers that would like to provide this amenity to their tenants or users. But without having it in the zoning code, it's not a requirement really. So getting it into the zoning code that really applies across all developments, it's a first step. It's tricky. So what I've heard is that the short-term parking is not the problem. Even asking for long-term parking is not a problem, but we can only call it long-term parking. All these different design requirements and access control is not something we can actually ask for in the zoning code, because it's more of a, we don't have that legislative authority to do so. So we may have to do that through the PFM, like in tandem with the zoning code. But my understanding is that the Parking Reimagined team is looking into that issue as we speak. So I've not heard an update on that. But we keep plugging away on creating this updated guide, and hopefully we will be able to include the long-term parking as intended into the zoning code when all is said and done.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm next, and then Aaron will do you. Did I hear you say that it is 2 outlets per inverted U-rack?
That's a recommendation, yeah. Ideally in floor.
10
So
inverted U-racks, there have to be 20 outlets.
Ideally, so e-bikes are really up and coming, and also our scooters. So it's not actually that many inverted U-racks that are provided in long-term parking spaces because it's just 30%. But ideally, if outlets could be provided at each rack location, it would allow all the users that park their bike at those racks to charge their e-bike or e-scooter or other micromobility. So if that's a concern for some reason, I would like to hear more about that. Like, is that too many to ask for building, code reasons? Is there like a limit to how many outlets a bike or a room can have without triggering some sort of issue? Like, you may know more than I do, so please let me know.
I don't know either, but
okay.
You're asking for outlets that are going to be on the floor.
I think it says convenient location, so that doesn't create a tripping hazard. So if it's too far on the wall, the e-bikes particularly don't necessarily have a long extension. So if it's too far away, it's not usable. If it's in the floor right under the rack, it would be the most convenient location because it's right there and nobody's going to trip over cables. That makes sense.
Can a car use a bicycle recharging station?
Yes, it's the same power voltage. Like, so the power stations for electric vehicles can also be used by electric bikes.
And vice versa.
And vice versa, yes. And some e-vehicles, particularly scooters, have detachable batteries that people can just take into their apartments or workspace and charge it there if they wanted to. But others have it built in and they really need to be plugged in. And if you don't have, I have 3 e-bikes and I plug them in my garage, but if I would live in an apartment building, that would be a lot harder to charge the bike if there are no outlets in the bike room.
Okay, Aaron.
Hi, Nicole, thank you for the presentation. I also have an e-bike-ish related question, and that has to do with security or higher security bike racks. Has there been consideration of providing guidance for bike racks that are, for public bike racks, not inside a building, that are more secure than a regular bike rack, but lower than a bike locker? And the reason I'm asking this is because bike lockers, currently they're at transit stations and they require annual memberships. You're not going to show up one day and park your bike there. And so this is just another hurdle for e-bike adoption because occasional users won't be able to use these high security bike racks. So I've seen, pilot trials of racks that have like these plastic clamshells that go over a bike or more heavy duty locks. San Francisco did one of these pilots in one of their metro stations. So just, has there been discussion on providing guidance because there might be a user with high budget that wants to consider these options?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. I don't think that's included yet, but we will make sure to do so. At least as a recommendation for consideration as an option to make short-term parking more secure. So it wouldn't meet all the requirements to qualify for long-term parking because it wouldn't be protected from the elements, but for short-term or medium-term, it would be a great option. And I'm aware of the type of rack you're referencing. So I'm not sure if that's the only company that does these or if this is becoming more common, but we can look into how to phrase that recommendation to make it more universal, applicable.
Thank you.
Okay, that appears to be all of the questions. Any final comments, Nicole?
No, just I will share again that document. So if you have any further questions, please read through it and feel free to mark it up. And ideally within the next 2 weeks or so, so we can get this out to the public for review at some point, hopefully in August. So you're our major stakeholder group. So since nearly all the big bike groups and interested folks are part of this committee, this is a great opportunity to get some feedback from members in your organization. So these are not, feel free to share with members to have them reviewed as part of the stakeholder review.
So I'll give you a little bit of feedback. I had a bicycle stolen from a I guess you would call it a short term. It's outside my building back in Crystal City. Inverted U stand, but just used a cable lock. And they came in and cut the cable, and I got a cut cable out of it. I'm not sure. I think they even had cameras, but I don't, camera doesn't bring your bike back. So I'm not sure what you can do to engineer that out. Maybe not make it as easily accessible for somebody to drive up in a pickup and take a bike. But I don't know how you could do that. But any thought to that would be useful. Yeah,
some educational signs on how to lock a bike correctly can be helpful, particularly in bike rooms, or asking people to lock their bikes in bike rooms. So there's still a chance of theft, even in an access controlled environment, and particularly in short-term parking out in the public. So having awareness of what type of lock and how to lock. Ideally, it's actually 2 locks. So in hard inverted, what do I call those? U-locks, and a cable lock to lock all the parts and of the bicycle. So it makes it as hard as possible. Of course, nothing will really prevent a determined thief to steal a bicycle. But the best we can do is make sure it's visible location, it's lit, it's a public space, not secluded, has the right type of rack, and maybe some guidance for users on how to lock. But if you get there and you don't have the right lock, there's only that much we can do. And that's actually exactly what I'm not sure who made that recommendation earlier. These high security short-term bike parking racks are supposed to help with. They're very hard to tamper with. You don't need to carry a big lock around. It doesn't matter if you know how to lock your bike or not, because the bike rack itself has this lock attached that really clamps that bike down and makes it very safe from theft. So I'm not sure what the liability on these particular racks are, like if a bike gets stolen, but it's definitely better than many of the kind of locks that are available to the public in bike stores. Those are none of them are foolproof.
Okay, thanks. We now move on to the discussion section of the agenda. And David has been nice to put me first here. The Safe Routes to School program letter to the Board of Supervisors. The letter is essentially finished, and I'm ready to send it. It'll go out tomorrow. I have to tell you that with these letters, since my name goes on it, and it goes to almost everybody who is important in the county, certainly for our cause. I have to be pretty meticulous about making sure that I don't make any dumb mistakes. Bob Cosgriff was nice enough to take a look at it and help me fix it. Now that I've got an up-to-date list of everybody, which goes on the side of the letter. You'll see it. I think the next letter will be able to do a lot more quickly. But that's essentially ready to close out. Which brings us to a possible letter regarding the delay in releasing the report. Jim Klein, you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I was not surprised that VDOT has not made any, had completed the consultant study, but not made any movement to adopt the 35-mile-an-hour speed on Route 1. And I mean, the good news is that the design of the Route 1 corridor is based on that speed limit being 35 and the associated design speeds, but the urgency is now really because, as it says here in the letter, there are a number of new housing, mostly development, some mixed use, cropping up on Route 1, especially in the Pendle area. The North Hill area's 30-year effort to build affordable housing is nearing completion. And but there are going to be just a lot more people walking on Route 1 to and from the nearby commercial areas. And as people continue to race on Route 1, 45, 55, 65, I've seen them go 85, and they weave in and back before traffic. We need to get that speed limit in place now. And I just don't sense, I think at this time it would be good to send another letter to our glorious Board of Supervisors, ask, because we can't send this to VDOT, but they can, to get VDOT off the dime and get this thing done. The long history of this is that 10 or 15 years ago when it was first done, I think you'll remember when we talked about this, that a very small group of people in Mount Vernon area opposed it and were very loud, and they dropped the 35-mile-an-hour speed where proposal was all ready to go even. So VDOT is reluctant to sort of move again for fear that might happen again, but it doesn't appear that any of that's going to happen. They were supposed to have a public meeting this spring. It's maybe 20 days left in spring here or less. So this doesn't appear that they're really moving on this. So I wanted to put forward this letter, and the text is here. I know there is one typo, a second typo I found in the first paragraph, of course. So in that second sentence, but hopefully that people read it. I know Karen had some comments I saw in an email just a short while ago, but I'd be able to answer any comments or questions. I tried just to pull what we had written before, but bring it up to date. I don't think we need to include all the items from the last letter, but if you wanted to, we could do that as well. So I'm hoping that's kind of an overview here. We want to applaud them for what they've done, and which they have tried to put in some and have successfully installed high visibility crosswalks in all four corners in some cases. Some of those corners don't have any decent pedestrian signal associated with it, but can't have everything, I suppose. Some of the leading pedestrian intervals are installed. Some are not, but so it just seems like they've done some pilot work. We need to get it going and do the rest of the signalized intersections on Route 1 so people can cross the street. The number one thing that you can do to prevent death is to reduce the speed limit. That's kind of the gist and point of what we need to say again. So I'm not sure what more you want me to go through, Ken. If you want me to go through the letter, I can, or I'm hoping everybody had a chance to read it.
Let me open the floor to comments, and I'm going to check the formatting to see if it fits in the page.
Yeah, I tried to use the letter you had sent before.
Let me see what it looks like. I'll know in a minute. So hang on. Karen, why don't you make your comment now at the meeting?
Okay. We had a really horrible accident in Oakton the other day, and my just thought when reading that is that it's not just the speed limit, but it's the enforcement. And I don't know if the studies have shown that to be the issue or not, but I'm really seeing, especially young people, just enjoying going really fast where they shouldn't be. And that seems to be what happened. Killed 2 students at Oakton High School the other day. So when you say reduce the speed limit, I'm thinking there has to be enforcement with that. That was just my general comments in reading this. And I've experienced that a lot lately. I'm seeing young people that are just going faster and faster just because they think they're in a spot where it's not going to be enforced. I think that leads to pretty bad accidents.
I have to say I agree. I'm actually quite familiar with the Oakton situation. My son's a special ed teacher at Oakton. But enforcing speeds is, hate to be bureaucratic, but it's a different department. That's the police and the justice system, which would be asking, we can only ask the Board of Supervisors, which would be asking the Board of Supervisors to engage. I'm not saying it's unimportant, Karen, but we're asking them to engage a completely different component of the Virginia Department of Transportation. Well, actually, the state police are not even in VDOT. And Fairfax County Police, of course, would not be part of VDOT. So we would be, my reaction is that's really a separate letter. But that's just my thinking. I'll entertain anybody else's ideas on that.
So can I be acknowledged? I have my hand up, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't checking hands. Go ahead, please.
So Mason District has had several accidents of late and 3 fatalities at a minimum. One of them was on Route 7, which frankly has very similar characteristics to the Route 1 corridor, and has had a very slow response from VDOT's Arlington staff person. Just a situation where a woman had to walk in the roadway to continue along the sidewalk, Route 7, so at 45 miles an hour, she was killed. On 236, which is also about to has had the recent STARS survey, 18-year-old girl was killed crossing a marked crosswalk coming off of 395, coming from her job, going home. And then, of course, in downtown Annandale, we had something which really isn't related to these because it's a really involuntary manslaughter where the woman went off the road because she was getting her drink out of the bottom of her car, and killed somebody we actually had worked with. I'd worked with on this, had hurt somebody I'd worked with on this committee. And so my bigger issue, it kind of talks about what Karen's talking about, but it's like, so Jim has crafted this letter and has worked diligently to make this thing happen. And my thought was, okay, so I need a letter too, because we got, very similar issues, very similar potential solutions for those issues. I mean, they're minor differences, but the corridors are very similar. And so I don't have any intention of taking away from the work that Jim has done, but how do we actually address this on a slightly larger scale? Because one of the things they're looking at for Leesburg Pike is to drop the speed, but they're not going to do this until they complete a study that is part of the BRT study they're planning to do over the next few years. So I'm just in a situation where, do we wait until Jim's letter goes out and we get, whatever response we're going to get from that, and then do one for Mason District, for our 2 major roadways? Or is there some commonalities that we should be addressing? And so I don't want to take away from the urgency for the Route 1 corridor. I just need to have a sense of what's an appropriate way. Like, do we do this for every single road we've got where we have fatalities? Because they're not actually getting better. I'm not sure. Vision Zero seems to be a multiplier rather than a goal at this point. So I'm kind of concerned, and I want to know, the sense of the group is like, how do we support this, but then also continue to expand the scope, because it's really not just the Route 1 corridor. It's, I have several places in Mason District where this is happening.
Hey, Bob, why don't you give us a summary of the Safe Streets meeting on Monday that you sent me information on.
Yes, Ken, thank you. Yeah, just for the information of everybody, on Monday, I attended a virtual meeting that was sponsored by the Safe Streets for Fairfax Families for Safe Streets, founded by Mr. Mike Doyle. And they had a senior VDOT official there who's basically in charge of looking at safety issues. And they focused on 4 corridors. Route 1 was one, Route 7 was one, between Bailey's and 7 Corners. Blake Lane was one, almost ironically, tragically, and Route 236, the STARS project that Jim mentioned. So the commonality with what Jim Klein is talking about in his letter was that there are speed studies. There's one that they're doing on Route 7. It's almost done, from what I understood Mr. Lynch to say. And they've taken some steps to, create some minor safety enhancements along Route 7 where the fatality occurred not too long ago. I think it was on December 31st, 2021. And also at attendance were Rachel Flynn, the Deputy County Executive for Transportation, and Tom Bisadny, the head of FCDOT. And Supervisor Alcorn was there, although he didn't say anything. Supervisor Gross was there. I sort of detected on the part of the people representing the Fairfax Families for Safe Streets a lot of frustration with the sort of glacial pace that improvements are studied and planned and implemented. In the meanwhile, people continue to die. And I think Ms. Flynn sort of expressed some of that frustration herself in some way. I think we got to a point now where it's not business as usual. We're up to 9 fatalities. It's only early June. There's a lot of studies, and if you want something to die, study it, I guess. But this letter here that Jim has drafted, I think is a good first start. And I think maybe we should send it and then broaden our scope with a subsequent letter that sort of addresses all the high accident corridors. And we know which 4 VDOT's focused on because that was the meeting. I'd also like to suggest that we invite Mr. Doyle to our meeting at some point in the future, July or September, whenever we can get him, because that is a really good organization. They're like FAB and WABA. They're really focused. They're really organized. They're data driven, and they're trying to make a difference. They're trying to do what we're trying to do. So the meeting was very informative to me, but it's just hard to think that we can't make certain things happen almost right now, especially where we have the data that shows that there are certain areas that are high impact in terms of accidents and fatal accidents. So that's basically a short summary.
Bob, I had a quick question, and it also a question regarding the Jim's kind of larger scale thing. And I will take my park authority hat off and put my old DOT hat on for a second. Did VDOT or anyone from the county address anything about working with the General Assembly about changing the language to allow speed cameras in Fairfax County?
They did mention speed cameras under the rubric of enforcement, which I know is what Karen mentioned. And on that regard, the police lieutenant, I guess, who's in charge of, the traffic safety, said that one of the enforcement issues is the force is down something like 160 officers. And it's a resource issue that they can't put as many officers on patrol. He also said that, they do provide these speed feedback things, which tend to possibly alert people that they're going too fast. But the VDOT engineer said that he ran a long-term study in Culpeper and said that they don't really slow people down unless you park a police car next to them. So, the votes are out on that one. But the enforcement issue is unfortunately at this point, my understanding that it's sort of a resource issue within the motor division and even the patrol division. With the
Well, the Fairfax County back in the old day used to have like red light cameras, and they were run by FCDOT staff, and they had a consultant who collected data. So it was in partnership with, I think, the police department, but it was staffed separately. And so, but they all went away because the General Assembly considered it, I'm probably bastardizing it, but an invasion of privacy. And so they kind of did away with it. Others, like City of Fairfax, can put them in. Other like separate localities outside of the jurisdiction of VDOT can put them in. And we have them. We have school speeding zones for cameras, much like Maryland has. You know, they have speeding corridors that they can put them in, but Virginia, as far as I know, doesn't. And so it would. I don't know if it's not just resources, it's the allowance to change the law.
Yeah, that was mentioned, and it does require General Assembly approval for installation of cameras, and it's a lot easier, I guess, for cities, independent jurisdictions, to get those, to wit, Fairfax City. I think.
So can I briefly speak up about the, hey, this is Sean Newman from Fab. Apologize, I joined a little late today.
Hi, Sean.
So the General Assembly has authorized speed cameras in 2 specific locations, in work zones and in school zones. However, to my knowledge, definitely nobody in Fairfax County, and I'm not actually certain if anyone in the state of Virginia has implemented those yet, has actually put them in and started enforcement using those.
City of Fairfax has.
City of Fairfax has.
Correct.
Great. Staff on the line do you know what the holdup is here in Fairfax County?
I do not. So I'm not personally involved in any speed camera discussion. This is Lauren Delmar's field. Like, she's specializing on the safety aspects. So she's unfortunately on vacation this week, but I can ask her to follow up with you all regarding the speed camera.
Yeah, because I know I've mentioned this at previous meetings, but that's been a major issue. Is we have these, and I think I brought it up with the deputy county executive, but we have none actually in place. I don't even know who is the one authorized to, implement the speed cameras. Is it the county? Is it county police? Is it VDOT? I'm not certain that I want to know the answer, but I'd like it to be implemented, because the fact that we haven't done this and it's been law for, I think, 2 years now, or a year and a half, is surprising.
Well, it does seem to me to be a good, if you don't have patrol officers, and you have people, young people, doing 70 miles an hour on Blake Lane, I don't see, any other solution. It's so yeah. I'm sorry, I stepped out of turn. Howard, please go ahead.
I was driving through Alexandria on Saturday, and I drove past, I think, 2 or 3 of these speed alert signs, showing what your speed was. And by the time I passed the 3rd one, I said, oh, I better slow down. It was a 25-mile-an-hour road, 4-lane road, but City of Alexandria had the speed controlled and obviously maybe patrolled. And I think it's changing the minds of Alexandria drivers. And I think something like that's going to need to be done in Fairfax County to, just like the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers 20 years ago or 30 years ago by this time, they made some major inroads. And I think that's what it's going to take to slow the people down.
Jim?
Yes. So I'm not sure what study the person was referring to that said those speed reduction signs aren't radar activated speed zones are not effective, but they're very effective. They reduce the operating speed 7 to 10 miles per hour consistently. They've been on the Parkway. They're very effective there. You can I witness it all the time. So I'm not sure, that kind of misinformation ought to be shut down immediately. But those are the most effective tool we have. They're the most cost-effective tool. They need to be used. They do need to move around. You can't just have them up all the time, but they do need to be, adjusted in their locations so that people don't get used to it and decide nothing's ever going to happen. So there is some management associated with that, but I just want to make that point.
Bob.
Yeah, somebody, in a discussion here, we talked about what other things can be done. And on the Blake Lane issue, they talked about a road diet, and they said that, that could be tied to the future repaving of the lane, Blake Lane, and they could bring it down to 11 feet per lane. He said it's actually much too wide, but they did do a speed study there, and it showed that, quote, 35 miles an hour was the appropriate speed. Of course, that might be true if everybody went 35 or even 40, but the most recent accident, the speed was much, much higher, and that was the main contributing factor. The other VDOT rep that was there talked about a few things they did. They think they put in some high vis crosswalks and maybe put up a sign or two, but the people that were speaking from the community on Blake Lane were basically, again, showing a little bit of frustration and sort of said the county is not innovative or creative. Well, that's probably not fair because VDOT controls the roads, not the county per se, but there might be ways to force synergism, between FCDOT and VDOT. I know that's sometimes a hard thing to do, but and for Route 7, there's a few minor little, almost to me, maybe cosmetic isn't the right word, but some places, and they talked about some of the constraints for making the sidewalk safer in certain areas, especially where there was a fatality. But again, it's sort of a matter of sense of urgency and business as usual. Things are just not going to get done very quickly. And then there's the funding issue. I mean, what VDOT has to deal with. So it's a complicated scenario. It's sort of a superheated ball of gas, but I guess all these groups have to keep advocating, and we among them. And that's why I think, again, it would be useful to get Mr. Doyle to be at one of our meetings, because he's very passionate and very involved, and he's involved because he was a victim of an accident and he wants the streets to be safe.
Sean. Sean, you're still on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to reiterate that one of the biggest things, at least in school zones and in work zones, that we have available to us is this automated speed enforcement. And the General Assembly has specifically said that they are not going to act on expanding that authorization to a more general, to the general roadways, unless they see results from those areas. And so we need to implement those here in Fairfax County, both to enact short-term gains in safety, and to enact more long-term gains by, showing the General Assembly that these things work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that that's my concern about just generally saying lower the speed limit to 35. It's a little bit of respect for the speed limit. And if people are just going to generally drive 45, even if we lower the speed limit to say to 35, I feel like there are people who are just going to learn that the speed limit is not very relevant and encourage them to do more of what I've frankly been seeing a lot of lately is just I guess joyriding or almost drag racing. It's just like no respect for the speed limit.
So there are plenty of there is evidence that lowering the speed limit lowers speeds, and the thought that doesn't, it may not work for everybody, and there will still be people who will exceed the speed limit, some by ridiculous amounts, but lowering speed limits does lower speeds, and leaving it high or raising it will enables the status quo and people to continue going faster. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to discount what you're saying about people ignoring it in the long run, and we need to build to lower speed standards into the design, as has been mentioned earlier in the meeting. But starting with lowering the speed limits still helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to bring this back to Route 1 for a second, although all these things are really important for the countywide as well. But on Route 1, the land use is changing so fast that when you drive up Pendaw, I don't know if you know that area, if you used to go bowling with your little kids, it's no longer possible. But the street wall is now starting to form. So there's residential and mixed use projects coming right up to the side of the road, which has a huge effect on your perception of how fast you're driving. So here's a case where it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. I mean, the corridor is going to change rapidly when the bus rapid transit gets built. It's going to go even faster, but it's changing right now. And so the urgency on Route 1 is that with all these new people moving in that don't have access to cars or they're just not going to be able to make it across the street, let alone, get out of their residential building, just even in a car. It's just the speed with which people are driving, except for when it's congested, is outrageous. And so I just want to kind of express the urgency for Route 1. I'm sure it's the same on 7 and 236 and certainly Lake Road. And I did put in this letter, other parts in the first sentence, I think, or second sentence, Route 1 corridor and other parts of the county, but I'd be happy to add in there parentheses such as the other 3 corridors that have been identified by VDOT, but there's several other ones beyond those as well. I mean, VDOT is a changing organization, and they do have some pretty amazing and talented people kind of moving up the ranks, but they're still controlled by somebody who just doesn't want to move very fast, so doesn't really care about the urgency of it all. But some of the younger folks that are moving into positions of authority are really great. I think if we could just give them more support in their jobs, for them to do their jobs, which they'd be more than happy to do. They just run into, frankly, people like Mr. Lynch, who I've known for 25 years. And he, in his early part of his career, he was a thorn in the side of every little pedestrian safety or bicycle safety or traffic calming project that ever was put before VDOT. So, and I'm hoping that's, it's recorded, and I hope he hears it, because it really is a pretty outrageous thing for him to be really in charge of this. I'm sure he's had a complete career change, I hope. So I really need to I really want this letter to go, and I'm happy I'll write 3 more, if you want me to write 3 more. But I think we should send one every month. I think we could send them every week, and we still wouldn't never get enough done. So I'm hoping that we can get through this and just move forward with this letter. I'm happy to help anybody, work with anybody to on any of these other corridors or places that you know about. I did spend 15 years of my career working on the Route 50 traffic calming project. So I'm pretty well aware of any speed reduction measures and their effectiveness, their ability to slow travel down. It's something I've worked on my whole career, so I'm happy to help out. But I don't know if I can get a motion from somebody to get this letter going.
Before we do that, Jim, I'd like an opportunity to tighten up the text, because when I do the typesetting of it, it sits all on the first page, and the only thing on the second page is my signature. So it's a little bit awkward. So if you don't mind, I'll also try to be more specific, as you said. So can you give me an opportunity to rework it so that its typesetting fits on a single page?
Would it be possible just to give you the authority to do that and send the letter? I mean,
I'm willing, if the committee is willing to do that and make that part of the motion, that's fine.
So do you want, the original question there was, can we add something about enforcement to this? And I guess I'll repeat that. I understand that this letter is heavily focused on the actual speed limit and the other design elements that are going on right now. Is it possible to add a sentence or 2 about enforcement? That we're still directing this at the Board of Supervisors, and they they can direct that at FCPD rather than VDOT. This is all going to the Board of Supervisors. So I feel like we could easily include a line about that says this needs to be enforced as well.
Well, okay, so you've heard, I'm sure if we have the police here, they'll do the same thing as they said at the other meeting on Monday night. You've heard they're down by 160 officers. So what do you specifically mean by enforcement? What do you want the county to do with enforcement? If the answer is put speed cameras out, which you've talked about earlier, then I would argue we should be specific rather than just make a general comment about enforcement, because it's too easy to wave their hand and say, well, we're 160 officers down. Sorry about that.
Ask about the speed cameras.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, that's specific. What is
people
the status?
generally want to do that? Want to move in the direction of endorsing speed cameras as a measure because we know that the police are understaffed, and that's my question to the committee.
So that's included in enforcement, and I think that a general ask for additional enforcement, and if we wanted to be specific, including ensuring we have enough officers and asking the General Assembly for additional authorities to implement automated speed enforcement along this route.
Well, yeah, they have authority for.
They don't have authority.
They have authority for speed cameras in school zones and construction zones.
Yeah.
I guess there's no school zones along any of these corridors. Is there a school zone on Blake Lane? Is that a school zone? Karen, do you know?
You just muted yourself, Karen.
I'm sorry. It's right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's right next to a school, so I would think so. I just want to comment about 160 officers down. How much are they up? Because there are a lot of officers that are working out there every day. And I think it's a bit of priority. Like, most of them are sitting somewhere. They could sit in different places.
Okay.
Ken, this is Beth. I think Blake Lane is school zone adjacent is the way I would describe it, because it's not, the school isn't directly on Blake Lane.
I think that's right.
And I'm not sure if it would fall in the school zone parameters.
So they wouldn't be able to put a camera there.
But that's just, our definition, right? Like, students walk on that way all the time because it's one of the major exits from Oakton. So it's just a question of how we've defined school zone or school zone adjacent. I don't think that's, if kids go walking there, that's the school zone. I mean, that's a pretty critical access way for students to get to that school, cross right over the highway to go turn right into Oakton. So that's just a definitional issue that I think we could challenge them on. Like, why not make that a school zone?
That's why I like being specific. I think that's a great point to make. You have some control over what a school zone is, and the Oakton accident made it clear that there are a lot of areas not marked as school zones where there are a lot of vulnerable school children. So that would be a third element of enforcement. More officers, potential speed cameras where you can put them up, and expanding the places where you can legally put up a camera by expanding the boundaries to a school zone.
I think that whatever we do, we shouldn't hold this letter up because I think it's important and I think it's well written. And I think that if we can come to an agreement on a couple of lines to add to it tonight, that I think that would be good. But I mean, I think we've mentioned enforcement in previous letters to the board, correct? I feel certain we have.
I don't think so. I mean, I'll go back and look, but I think our previous letters focused on studies and simple measures that you could do, quick fixes and that type of thing. But Jim, you wrote them all. Do you remember anything about enforcement?
No, I put the list of the 8 things we had. I probably had a list of about 20, you know.
Yes, you did.
We edited it down to like some kind of tolerable thing, but you know, in the way of enforcement, I think we should ask for what you can do now to enforce. We should ask the Board of Supervisors to find creative ways to enforce speed limits, such as and to provide. I would even suggest using the radar detection signs, you know, that flash the speed limit, but then also to then ask them their delegation to seek funding in at least Fairfax County and Arlington or whatever urban areas for radar or for speed cameras. I mean, we can put that in the letter. There's no reason not to ask for it. And to bring the point that enforcement is a critical issue. We just have never really, I don't think we've really put it front and center, you know, but so I guess I wish I had, but I don't think we have any authority. There's just no authority for this type of enforcement, unfortunately.
So the one thing that I will be hesitant about is that asking for enforcement beyond automated speed enforcement is asking for additional police officer interactions with potentially minority members of the public and potentially increasing those types of interactions that could result in seriously negative consequences. And so that's us in the bicycling community and in the walkability community, I think, have been trying to shy away from asking for additional enforcement that leads to those types of things, which is why the automated speed enforcement is such a good deal, because it does provide that negative consequence without the potential of that negative consequence becoming deadly.
Those are important thoughts, Sean. And I believe that whole concept, actually all of the ideas that we bounced around tonight, are a completely separate issue from Jim Klein's letter. And to try to squeeze them in to Jim Klein's letter really doesn't do them justice. The benefit this committee has to the Board of Supervisors and government in general is that we brainstorm these things in a very cordial way. And listening tonight, I can think of a great letter that we could write solely on the concept of enforcement that doesn't try to create a key phrase that captures all of these thoughts. So allow me to suggest I would be more comfortable with a letter that Jim's done here, you know, on his issues with regards to delayed study releases and a variety of other things, and then a separate letter that captures all of the many good ideas we've had here with regards to enforcement. That would be, I think, a much better impact.
I would propose that we authorize Ken Comer to make minor modifications to Jim's letter as written, with the intention of sending it to the Board of Supervisors.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
This is Bob.
Any further discussion on that motion?
Can we add that we work on a second letter for enforcement or some of the other discussions in the coming months?
Or that can be a separate motion after we've done this one.
I was trying to do it in one. Trying to be efficient.
I understand that, but life gets more complicated that way. Okay, so the motion on the table is to allow the chairman to make some modifications, mostly for spacing, but that we publish Jim Klein's letter essentially as is for the Board of Supervisors. Is anybody opposed to that motion? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. And I'll send you what I do so that you're happy with what it is. It is now 8:30. our floor is conveniently free of immediate issues. We can have any comments from our one member of the public or any other members of the public who have joined us. I think it's still Brian, right?
Yeah, I'm still here. Didn't think I was going to have anything, but the discussion on speed stuff and the high speed of cars did bring up some stuff. I heard it kind of touched on, but not necessarily fully mentioned. But so I figured I'd bring it up. But also a form of enforcement that I've heard of more recently that helps slow down speed without necessarily needing someone sitting there and enforcing it, or speed cameras, things like that, is things like road narrowing or putting restrictions to make it feel more closed off when you're driving. I know that's been done other places, but I figured I'd bring it up. I did hear someone mention, as the buildings get closer into the road, it makes you feel like you're going faster, and that somewhat has an effect, but it's similar to that, I guess. So.
Yeah, actually, staff comes up with a whole lot of things to call speed calming members. I live in Kings Park, and there are bump outs, and of course we have the infamous speed bumps. But there's also bike lanes have been known to do some traffic calming, speed calming measures. So yeah, there are a lot of measures under consideration by both VDOT and FCDOT. They have some tricks in their kit. But I think, as Jim pointed out, and as this Safe Streets families have pointed out, it is maddeningly slow, and we're very hopeful that this, if there's any good out of these awful tragedies we've seen over the last few months, that we'll start to get a turning of the worm. Anything else, Brian?
Nope, nothing else from me.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Where are we now? I'm going to skip to other topics where we could conceivably entertain. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't need a motion for me to draft a potential letter that captures all the ideas we've bounced about. I'll do that, and I will. So, preview of coming attractions. I am unavailable. The reason I have Paris in my background is I will be in Paris during the course of next month's meeting. So Bob is going to be the chair of that meeting, but I will have drafted for the committee to consider a letter on speed enforcement. And all of the subtleties, including those that Sean mentioned, that we are also deeply concerned about, and that the fact that this is a delicate issue that requires careful management on the part of those trusted with our enforcement of our government laws. So I think that captures all those issues. Before we move, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you draft that, I think I would like to make sure that we kind of get that reviewed, definitely by the group members, and if possible by if we can get some of the other stakeholders, Mike and Safe Streets, etc., to possibly weigh in on that. I think we have some good ideas here, but I just want to I would like to, if we're okay with it, make sure that we're kind of capturing the different nuances.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances here. So yeah, I know no problem. Well, individual members can share a draft with anybody they want. So I'll try to get this thing out to everybody in time for you to be able to share it with somebody, for you to collect that yourself. So, and bring that to the meeting. Our meetings are open to everybody. So before I move to the staff report, I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
Sorry, that was just
You have an echo, Sean. You need to mute. Okay, before I move to the staff report, this has been a rather amazing couple of months, I guess going back to the winter, but for members of our committee. Wade Smith, the former member, former chairman of the committee, James Albright and Jim Klein, were all recognized by Volunteer Fairfax for their community volunteerism, and being a member of this committee, long-standing member of this committee, has been a key part of that. In addition, I don't know if people caught this up, but Bob Cosgriff has been named Lord of Fairfax, or Lord Fairfax. I don't know exactly what the title is, Bob, but your lordship, but for his volunteerism, and one of the key elements in the citation was his membership, long-standing membership again, on this committee. So I think that it's I'm delighted to hear all this recognition for all of the hard work everybody comes. I don't know about other committees, but I'm always amazed when I turn on my video and I find almost the entire committee here. So every single month. So it is hard work to make all this work, especially if you're going to be writing all these letters and all that stuff for Jim. But for every one of their participations and those are well-deserved honors, and I wanted to go in our minutes that we definitely recognize their contributions to our community and making life better here in Fairfax. Okay, so if we were in person, of course, who knows? Maybe someday we will be in person. We would applaud. By the way, Dave, are we ever going to be in person again? Does the Board of Supervisors meet in person?
Yeah, I believe they do. Yes. So that's I mean, eventually, one day, sure. I don't have great information. I know it's been discussed in the past. I think that the rules that are applicable to this committee are not necessarily the same as ones that would apply to the Board of Supervisors for their choices to meet in person.
Are all of the committees meeting electronically? All the boards and committees?
Yeah, I don't know if all of them are. I know others are.
Okay, just wondering.
We did have that one in-person meeting last year. I think I'm echoing somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the issue is sort of the kind of creating like a new sort of hybrid world. I think is a way that would be good to go in order just to have both like the video capability and the in-person capability. My understanding is that it is the county's state of emergency, I believe, that is giving the authorization for the committee to meet in person, not the state like or Commonwealth-wide state of emergency, which was lifted last year. But yeah, so all that rambling was to say I don't really know, I guess. Sorry for a bad answer.
Yeah, I can maybe add one more point to that. That's has been a holdup is I don't think we have the rooms accessible in the government center that were being used for vaccination clinics. So that was one of the reasons why we couldn't meet in person, because we just don't have a room. Until that changes, we could meet in our office, but the only problem there is there's no air conditioning, and it's very expensive. It's like $400 to run the air conditioning, and I'm sure nobody wants to be in a sweaty room. It gets really hot in there. So there's some logistical issues with just meeting space as well. So that's to be determined, but it sounds like is that the general interest of the committee to meet in person again and not meet virtually?
Yes. I
Okay.
say this reluctantly. I'm not sure that it's true for everybody on the committee. I see some thumbs up, and I absolutely refuse to put it to a vote. But because there's benefits to both ways. I'm just wondering, this has to be, I feel embarrassed saying that we have this emergency when literally everybody is meeting in person everywhere. So
I think it
George
had something
Mason
to
is
do with on-street dining, like on parking lot dining as well. So that can only happen in Fairfax County when the state of emergency is in session, and it's going really well for those businesses. So I think that's until there's legislation, and I think that was being discussed, that would allow dining on parking lots. This state of emergency may continue so that we can, but it doesn't mean we have to necessarily meet remotely. So if the committee
Well,
wants to meet in
it'll
person,
be a
Brand.
policy
find a
decision.
meeting
Every
space.
board and committee, I mean, everybody will be affected the same way. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going to happen with policy over the next few months, because it is really kind of silly to go through that diatribe about how, we're deathly afraid any one of us could die at any minute.
Yeah, no, it's definitely no health reason. So I can tell you that. So there are lots of reasons that have nothing to do with COVID.
Yes, but that's not what the lawyers have me say.
Right. No, but I mean, like, there are definitely county groups meeting in person, including the Board of Supervisors. And I know that the Park Authority board is meeting also in person, because I've spoken there in person like a year ago. So they have been meeting for a while, but we need to have the appropriate space available. And as long as that can't be guaranteed, I mean, unless somebody offers their house, basically we need to be able to meet somewhere. And our usual space is not yet available as far as we know, but we will continue to kind of explore that if we know that's a priority for the committee to go back in person.
I would say that I could offer you the park board room as a meeting space. It has a dais and everything, but they meet the same night we do, so we'd have to change the date and the time. But I don't know if you want to check in the Heritage Building, if room 104, 105. So 104, 105, or 105, 106 downstairs on the first floor. I don't think that's being used like it was for the earlier 2 years. I think that's gone back to a regular meeting room. So you might want to check.
Okay. Are the doors accessible? Do they close at a certain time? I feel like I've definitely been in front of those doors while they were locked.
They do, but even the Park Authority has meetings in the Heritage Building and the door is locked. So there's somebody there to let the public in on the same nights, because the park board's usually meeting the same night we do.
Okay, yeah, there may be more park staff involved in those meetings than FCDT staff in this meeting. But
well, the good thing is the room is right next to the door, so you can see. You can just knock on the window, and then someone can come let you in. So
the reason we're double staffing, and that's a bonus for going into back into the in person, is we don't need to double staff these meetings. Right now we have to do it because we need a host and presenters, so we try to have 2 people there because of the technology. And Chris Wells is, prefers to have technology help as well, since he's newer to running these online meetings. But in general, there's usually 2 of us there, and in person wouldn't require that necessarily. So since we have gazillion evening meetings to cover in active transportation, that would definitely be appreciated.
Yeah, you might want to check the Heritage Building though, because the air conditionings are still on since the park board meets, and so the room downstairs on the first floor might be available again. So.
And who's the contact for that?
I'll find out for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Bob. I'm addressing this to Nicole. I haven't been over to the government center in a while, but I'm a member of the Medical Reserve Corps, and we were over there a lot doing the vaccine clinics, but we haven't had a call for volunteers in like 2 months. So I would be surprised to think that they're still using rooms for vaccinating people. And there are those rooms that are sort of expandable. We don't have to meet in the broom closet like we did a couple of years ago, but bigger rooms with the partitions you can pull apart and have plenty of space if people want to sit 6 feet. Do you know if they're still doing the clinics? Because we haven't been asked to come. I mean, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, last time we checked, they were still using the room for something COVID related, maybe not the clinics, but for storage, but it wasn't available. So we will take another look and ask if something has changed. and see if we can get a room in the government center somehow that would allow us to have the right spacing as well, since it's a large group.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, because when I was over there, I walked by room 8 and I always looked sort of wistfully into it. It was filled up with people with needles.
I think we last met in person a year ago in July. So it would be a 1-year in-person anniversary.
Okay, so the staff report, the one thing I want to get to is the I-66 OTB off-corridor projects. An update on the Fair Oaks segment sounded like that we needed a follow-up from the May meeting. Do either of you have any update on that?
We do not, unfortunately. That's something that we can ask Chris to get back to you as soon as possible. He's not in the office this week. So unfortunately, we don't have any new info on that for you this month, but we can get something emailed out certainly in advance of the next meeting.
All right. I guess the status of the missing seats, the vacant seats are, we've already had an update on that. I mean, they're aware of them and they're trying to fill them, but unless you have something more to say, Nicole.
And not on that specific topic, but we do have another update from the staff side, so let David address that.
Go ahead, David.
Sure, yeah. So the update is that this will be my last meeting, as I'll be leaving FCDOT later this month. So it's been a pleasure, and I've certainly learned a lot. Not just about how to use WebEx and Teams, but about all sorts of active transportation issues coming, being a part of these meetings. So just I guess just a so long and farewell. And we don't, I think, have identified if we're going to have a specific person as the primary staff liaison. I don't know if we've identified who that will be yet. So I'm not going to volunteer anyone for the group. I'll let the people who stick around figure that out.
Well, we'll be happy with any of the great members of staff, so we appreciate it. But David, we appreciate all you've done for us, working us through. You've basically been here during COVID. Is that essentially?
Yeah, pretty much. I started in my role like late January 2020, and then I had a couple weeks, and then it's been COVID ever since.
Well, we've been able to see you for 2 years without a mask, so we now know who you are, and we can at least say hello if we see you in Safeway. So, well,
and we've come a long way since when we were doing these by phone on AT&T.
Oh, geez.
Those were
so
nice.
on behalf of the
Those
whole
were rough.
committee, everybody has been here. We thank you for getting us through what is one of our more difficult periods.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask either David or Nicole, who do I send the draft agendas to for July and ongoing until a permanent staff liaison is hired or appointed?
Yeah, so Chris Wells will be the interim contact as a team manager. So he should get all of them, and he will need to assign, to the other roles. We are hoping to hire, of course, replace David's position. That will be a longer hiring time frame, so 3 to 4 months. And that person will pick up basically as the staff liaison, as the kind of outreach coordinator. We also waiting to be approved to hire another transportation planner too, under me. So that may be a potential candidate as well, depending on how quickly we can staff. So we're still waiting for authorization. It has been funded by the board. It needs to be internally authorized to list for hiring. So depending on how fast that goes, that may be another person. We do have a transportation planner too that I don't think we have introduced yet. Has Zach been to this meeting?
Zach made it last month, yeah.
Oh, he was there last month. Okay, so he will actually take on David's bike share workload. So I don't think we're going to ask him to also take on the outreach workload since he has other tasks as well. And bike share is a beast to manage. It's there's a lot going on. Yeah, basically a full-time job in itself. So again, to be determined, and of course we will miss David, and but hopefully we will be able to bridge and get you all the minutes and uploads and everything you need to do on the administrative side for this committee seamlessly. Yeah, we will to be determined who will staff next meeting.
So I should send it to Chris then, right? Is that the answer?
Yes. Chris will be the interim. So the first interim as the team leader, it will automatically go to him until he assigns someone else to be the lead.
Thank you.
And just as one last administrative note, I know I made this like a recurring meeting monthly, but so I'm gonna have to delete it so it'll get removed from everyone's calendars. And just the reason being that the person who like creates the meeting is the only person who can be like the host and do recordings and stuff. So it'll be needed to be recreated by someone currently at FCDOT for subsequent meetings.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Because you could go away and lock us in, lock us out. So got it. Okay. Sounds like you get that well in hand.
Can I ask a stupid administrative question?
You can ask anything you want.
Do you guys have an active Fairfax email address? Is there a bike walk email address that you guys have?
We have a bike Fairfax, we have a walk Fairfax, or a pedestrian programs. I think it's pedestrian programs, but we definitely have a bike Fairfax as well. That's a separate inbox. And then there is the DOT info that works as well. If anything active transportation related will be forwarded to us.
Okay, because when I've looked on the website, I know I found the active Fairfax one in the DOT info. I don't know that I've ever seen the bike Fairfax email address, but that's good to know that the active Fairfax or the DOT info one will be forwarded to you.
Yes, and the bike Fairfax one I think was specifically created for the bike map, and it should be on there. But we do use it frequently. So that mailbox is managed by me, just like the active Fairfax one. But the pedestrian mailbox is reviewed by Lauren, since she still has the pedestrian focus. But DOT info is done by our communication staff at FCDOT, and they distribute all the emails that they get to the appropriate people. So I usually, one of us gets those usually.
So just to clarify something that I glossed over, I want to send you folks back to Chris with a specific question about, so let me ask the committee, who asked for the update on the Fair Oaks segment, and could you state that as a question? Let's play Jeopardy. State that as something that we can be more specific for Chris for.
Yeah, Chris at the last meeting was going to go the next day to walk her through the Fair Oaks area to look at different alignments, because the way it was being done by the project team, they were sort of going to walk away from it. You know, we give you $1 million, you do what you want. And Chris has said, we're not going to do that. So he was going on the field the next day from our meeting last month, and he promised that he would feed back to us. So that's the specificity. What did he learn on that walk around?
I know a little bit about that, so that's not supposed to be the full update, but we are considering a two-way cycle track on the south side. In addition to the existing trail as an alternative for anyone that doesn't want to be in a cycle track. But VDOT and FCDOT agree that, you know, just flex post is not enough. It needs to be a little bit more of a barrier. So I believe VDOT is currently looking into curbing of some sort, either quick curbing or more permanent curbing islands because there's, drainage and all that. This is the first time we're doing such a cycle track treatment on the Virginia DOT road. So that's a good precedent. It would be VDOT maintained, which is also a good precedent. And we are watching with great interest of what they decide they're willing to maintain. And we hope to be able to, use it for future protected bike lane treatments in order to get away from the flex posts, which are a maintenance headache in the winter, and removing them is also not a preferred option for FCDOT. So is that kind of what you were looking for about, like, update wise? More details Chris would need to provide since he actually walked the segment and he may have some additional observations to share.
Well, I'll put it on the agenda for next month as something that he can give us the details, because he's the one that was in the field with VDOT and the project team. And but that does sound hopeful for sure.
Yeah.
I am a little concerned about safety because I'm not sure that a curb will keep a car from hitting a bicyclist.
Yeah, we have considered, or we talked about barriers, like the concrete linear barriers that were used for some of the interim or kind of pop-up COVID kind of slow street spaces. I'm not sure what the official name was, but kind of like the pedestrian area that was blocked off in Tyson's. Those are not a great long-term option from a primarily aesthetic standpoint. Like the adjacent property owners would probably not be happy to have these on their, beautiful road with the lined trees and the landscaping, and having these the barricade basically across the road. So we're looking for something that meets crash criteria. They're called barrier curbs. They're a little bit higher, so that would at least deflect a car. A car flying will probably not be held up by much apart from these concrete barriers. We looked at planters, so there's some planters that are being used in other communities to protect the bike lanes. There are none on the market that we could find that would meet VDOT's crash criteria, so they're not crash tested. So they look, and we know that's an issue for federally funded roads, that they need to meet federal crash criteria. We talked to the companies, and they said there's just no way of getting these crash tested because there's no category for planters in the crash test. So that seems to be something that is being worked on at least and addressed at the federal level, but it's not available to us in a VDOT road space as of this year. So the curbs are one of the best options we have in the context, and that's a very traditional way of protecting bike lanes. It's similar to shared use path level of protection.
Got it. Jim Klein.
Buffer.
Yeah, on the issue with Fair Oaks, another issue was the private consortium backing out of their promises, and I guess that's another piece that we'd like to know about. I think if they're going to do this on 495 South or whatever it is that I went to the public meeting on, and rely on these promises that are made early in the process, I'd like to know how those promises get enforced and what, how, are they even any good? Are we getting a bike trail or are we not? So it doesn't. That's another issue, maybe above all our pay grades, but we should certainly weigh in if we can. On the bike lane separation issue, if you have 5 feet and barrier curbs, you're going to get as good a protection as you're going to get anywhere. I mean, that should be enough for, especially with that barrier curb. If you don't have 5 feet, you can put a box beam guardrail right in the middle, which doesn't have those rough posts that you might hit on the backside of a guardrail. So that gives you two-sided finish, and you can make them out of anything. So they can meet the aesthetic qualities of Fair Oaks, Milt Peterson, whoever it is, that would. He didn't even live there anymore, does he? I don't know. But that's another option if you can't.
About the guardrail, yeah, in the middle of the road.
If you can't get to 5 feet, you can go ahead and put that box beam guardrail and get a good finish on it, make it look good.
Yeah, we have about 2 feet because we only have like a 12-foot travel lane, and we try to get the two-way cycle track as wide as possible.
So that's not going to work for him. You need, you need either you need 5 feet or you need a barrier. I mean, a Jersey barrier is 4 feet wide when you go from the base to the top anyway. I mean, it's, that's not a solution for you, luckily. So,
right. And that's why these curb segments are usually used in constrained bike lanes. So they're pretty common and seem to be, of course, I don't stop, again, a flying car, but just somebody kind of swerving into, the bike lane that we see so often because it's just a lane and they're not paying attention, that something like that will be deflected just like any other sidewalk or trail in the county.
Thank you.
Sean, did you have anything you wanted to say on the last minute here?
Just in opposition to the flex posts. I saw what happened to them at the Burke Road or Brook Lake Road and Braddock Road intersection, where there's flex posts that the plows just rolled right over and were just completely gone at the beginning of this year. That were just, they were not there. There was none of them. And so that's not a very solid protection.
Took everyone out, huh?
Better than paint, but only so much.
Yeah, we're considering putting flex posts on top of the curb, so it would still have that vertical element and the visibility, and would also alert the snow plows that something is under. But it would be raised and hopefully protected from the snow plow. So that's the current configuration we're discussing, but it's still all kind of like in engineering. So subject to final engineering, as we used to say.
On top of a curb makes sense. That's reasonable. The curb, as you said, will still at least deflect the majority of vehicle interactions better than the flex posts will alone. So thank you.
Okay, we've reached.
Before we leave, just to clarify, Nicole, how are you going to be sending out your draft parking guidelines?
I will send it via email to the group.
Okay.
Probably by the end of this week, I want to kind of take a step of adding that high security bike rack in there before I send it out.
So it'll come through David with one of David's?
David, yeah.
Okay,
David is still going to be with us until next Wednesday, so we're going to put him to work until then.
Thank you.
Work him to the end.
Gotta bring me dry.
All right. A motion is in order. And I can't
make a motion to end the meeting.
Okay.
I'll second it.
There we go. That's what I needed to hear. So I will see you in maybe in September, because I warn everybody, we often do no meeting in August, but we make that decision in July. So that'll be up to Bob and the rest of you guys. So I hope you guys have a good summer, and I'll see everybody later.
All right, everyone.
Thanks again, David. Thank you, everybody.